Hello. Let's go into a deeper area of 3D work in After Effects. I have a few things that I just want you to follow along with, as well as something that is included in the Moodle area for you to open up and to absolutely follow me with. Otherwise, if this is new to you or foreign or old, this is the time to buckle up and let's jam. All right, so the very first thing I want to talk about is just spatial relationships. And what we had already covered is things like orientation, establishing a floor, establishing walls, and whatnot. But now I want to talk about actually like an understanding of what that stage looks like and how to approach it and move into something that you can actually handle, manipulate, and create something that is more meaningful to your idea or your story. So what I have here is I have a new comp, and it's the same thing that we've been dealing with so far as dimensions go, 1920, 1080, and it's only 5 seconds long because we're not trying to like go into a crazy project right now. We're just learning stuff. So if I wanted to talk about staging and thinking about space and spatial relationships, the first thing we need is something that we all are understanding of, which is what we stand on, sit on, lay on, etc., and that is a floor. So I just want to bring in a floor. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid, and I'll make it some sort of gray. Doesn't matter what size it is, because I'm going to change this. And right now, it just fills my dimensions, because it was 1920 by 1080. Doesn't matter. I'm going to go into my switches, and I'm going to turn it into a 3D element. And I'm going to hit P for position. I'm going to hit Shift R to include with position something that is called rotation, orientation. I'm also going to hit Shift S. And so that's like bringing in all your friends. The Shift button and then these other keys is like, hey, I want all my buddies to be part of this party. So I started with position, I brought in scale, I brought in rotation, aka orientation sometimes. So that Shift button is the one that allows you to reach all these things. So if I'm thinking about creating a floor, we went through this before, I'm going to go through my rotations to get this thing so that it's flat and it's low and it's big. My very first concern, again, is my anchor point. And I didn't bring that in, so I had to hit Shift A. Now anchor point's there. So my anchor point is one in which I can either drag or make sure I understand that X value should be at 1080. And that puts that anchor point in the bottom. Now my position is one in which I want that Y value to also be at 1080. And so then that brings it back down. So now I've got this plate sitting there at the bottom of my comp. It's in a 3D space. Can't really tell yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it down, right? So this shouldn't be new because we did this in the last deal, and that is rotation on the x-axis, which would be not 90. It's a negative 90. Ah, it hits me every time. It'll hit you guys every time too. Negative 90. Bam. Laid it down. Bam, we have a floor. Done. I have a floor, but it's only that big. So then I have to think about like what do I want for staging all of this stuff, and that's where scale comes in. So I'm going to disconnect the link of a scale. I'm going to extend my Y for a little bit. I don't know how far I have to go, but then the most important part is my Y. Did I say Y or did I say X? Can't remember. So I'm going to throw that down. I'm going to go significantly far away. So that is my Y value, and I haven't even broken 1,000 yet. But I can see sort of the edges of my sides, so I'll take my X and I'll extend that just a little bit. So now I have a floor. You would never know. You would never know that it's a floor because it just looks like a graphic solid. It looks like I just put like a little gray box on the bottom of the screen. But what's happened is that this is something that has been incorporated into that 3D space and is kind of back there ready for whatever we can bring upon it. So now I just want to talk about spatial relationships. So at this point, I'm going to do layer, new, solid. And I'm going to call it bar 1. My width, I want to be skinny. I want to be like 200. And my height, I'm thinking about like maybe 400. Oh shoot, I hit enter too fast. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna change the color to something I can actually see. And that would be like red, blue, whatever. So now I have something that's just hanging out in the middle of my screen. Is it 3D? No, it's not. It's not 3D until I make it 3D. So even the fact that I started off with a floor or whatever it is that you might have done, every time you bring in a new layer, After Effects wants to believe that it's just a two-dimensional element. So you always have to make sure that you go and enable 3D. As soon as you do, you should see the 3 axes. You should see the green arrow for Y, the red arrow for X, and the blue arrow for Z, as well as the arcs of how you might like rotate these things. So now I have something that is 3-dimensional. But like I said the other day, it's not totally 3-dimensional. That is not a box. That is a wafer thin, even less than that, micro thin polygon. But now I can start to explore its relationship to this space. So I hit P, and I think about the vertical relationship of this thing with the rest of the world. That would be my Y. So I can increase my Y value, and at some point, nope, because it's at the 0 point. That's why. It doesn't go anywhere. It just looks like it's like scooping across the screen vertically, right? So I'm gonna hit undo. Let's think about this relationship of elements. Our floor was laid back, which we should all be. We'll all be laid back. Laid back into the distance, but its start point was at 0, Z. 0, Z is kind of like After Effects general entry point to 3D. So we haven't moved it back. We haven't moved it closer to us. It's just sitting there right at 0, as well as the position point of this. So this position point has a 960, a 540, and a 0. The 0 is Z. How close is it to the camera? How far away is it from the camera? So if I take this Z value and drag it closer, or I guess to the right, it goes away. If I drag it to the left, it's actually making its progress towards the camera. If I do any of these things by holding Shift, it does it at greater increments. Right? So at this point, I've surpassed the camera, like we're behind it. So I still have Shift held down, and I'm just dragging along my Z value. So this is something you should definitely try to get used to, is dragging forward and backwards with your Z. So that you know that a positive Z means that it's going away from you, and that a negative Z means that it's coming closer to you. Positive, further away. Negative, closer, or just behind you. So now that I've established that this thing is perhaps further away, then I can take a look at the position of the y and increase its value, and at some point it's going to intersect that floor. Come on, yeah, there it is, bam. So now that little element has like broken through the floor and is partially above it, but also below it. If I had a camera right now, I could move my camera downwards and I would move from above the floor to below it, and I would see the rest of that solid. We're going to get into cameras, we're going to get into lights here super soon, but that is something that you just need to know. So then how do I understand the relationship of that floor and the element that I want to engage with it? Well, it's already engaging, but what if I want to like stand on top of the floor? Then I have to think about that object. I'm just going to go ahead and hit reset, which is hitting control and clicking on position and hitting reset. Bam. So now we're back up. So I'm looking at this object and I understand that its anchor point is in the center of its X and Y. That means if I hit R, which opens rotation, if I click on X, it's going to rotate this object on that X origin, which is in the middle. Or if I move my Y value, it's going to rotate this thing on its side, because that's a vertical axis. And if it were the Z, then it's just like kind of spinning like a wheel. Okay, so those are really important things for me to think about. The most elemental factor of this layer is to make sure that I understand its anchor point. So I hit A, and it says, hey, here's your anchor point. So what I would love to do is I would love to move the anchor point down. Yeah, you just can't do it that way. You have to do it through the movement of these values. So this is a 400 by 200. Is that right? Or is it 2 by 4? It's 2 by 4. So it's 400 pixels tall. So if I want this object to have its orientation at the bottom, I have to change its anchor point to 400. So I'm going to click over here and hit 400. And now my anchor point is at the bottom of it. But it's still like it's like elevated up. It's floating above my floor. So what I should understand is that if I hit P, and knowing that my floor is, well, this whole dimension is 1920 by 1080, that vertical value from 0 to the bottom should be 1080. So if I hit in 1080, it drops it to the bottom. So now I have something that is actually laying on my floor. I know that the whatever I call dark gray solid, which I made my floor, has been, the anchor point's been changed. We've laid it down on rotation via the x-axis, extended its scale. So it's laying out there as a floor. So now this new element that I changed its anchor point as well as its position is now just laying down on the floor here directly in front of the camera. Which means if I take my position of Z and start sliding it in a positive value, it should start sort of skirting down the floor as you would expect. Or if I took it in a negative, it's going to get closer to the camera and eventually it's like gone. So I'm going to just shove it back there for a second, and we can see what happens from here if I were to lower it on the Y. So if I was going to lower on the Y, you can see that it just like slices itself through the floor, and it's gone. So things that are important for you to think about are those coordinates. Now I'm going to break out something totally new, and that is how we look at our artwork in a three-dimensional space. And this is the time where, if you're interested in 3D work and 3D modeling and animation, it's really important for you to think about an orthographic space and how these things actually portend to your work. So if I look at my composition window, I have all these different settings at the bottom, and one of them is this thing called one view. If I click on one view, it gives me, do you want 2 views? Do you want 4 views? But maybe I just want like one view vertical. That changes the way that I'm looking at my artwork. And right now, what I'm seeing is 2 views of everything that I have set up in my comp. If I change 2 views vertical to 2 views, I hit 4 views by accident. Sorry, vertical. I went horizontal. Horizontal. Bam. We're looking at our project in 2 different views. And on the right, we have our active camera, and on the left, we have our top. And this is when you can kind of click on these windows and say, well, I prefer that I would see it from a different angle. And so instead of from the top, you could say, I would like to look at this from the right. Things change. This is where we have to start wrapping our heads around how we're actually identifying what these objects are and where they're at, and how we are actually working with them in our space. So on the right, I'm seeing what the camera sees. And we have a camera sort of by default, but we haven't actually put one in here yet. But that's what we see, that's what will be rendered, that's what our movie will look like. On the left, we have now said, I'd like to look at this from the right side of the stage. So having the gray solid selected, you can kind of see that it's this element that is selected at the very bottom of the window. If I click on bar 1, it's like it's gone. Where is it? I have to zoom out substantially. Well, this is 2 zooms. That was a command minus. And now I can see that, all right, this little orange thing here is the floor, and this little guy here is my bar that I put in, and it's been shoved back in space. It looks like this because I'm looking at it from the right side. Now if I grab that bar and its Z position and start moving it, you can see that I can move it farther away, or I can move it closer to us. And as a result, on the other window, you can see what the camera is reading from this. So I can push it way, 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 way back, or I can bring it way forward, and eventually it'll get out of control. So the window on the left is what it looks like if you're standing on the side of a stage and actors are performing. The window on the right is the one that says, yeah, I'm the camera, and I'm going to gather and capture this information. So play around with that. We're going to come back and we're going to get a little more detailed with this, because this is important. And then we'll get into some really cool stuff. All right, thanks.